thousands of years before the appearance of man, an enormous bird soared over North America. Distinctive in flight, with its white slash and great wingspan, the bird was revered by native people and noted by the Europeans that came after. But as the final decades of the 20th century unfolded, human preferences took their toll. The finality of extinction loomed. A heroic effort ensued to rescue the bird that had become an iconic symbol of American wilderness. With fewer than 30 birds remaining, all were taken from the wild, and for the first time in over 10,000 years, no condors flew free to cast a shadow over the landscape. Against all odds, the species was pulled back from the edge of the abyss. So with great anticipation, the reintroduction of the condor back into the wild began. After 30 years of committed effort, the story of recovery for the California condor continues today. A story of environmental challenge, passionate conservationists, and a beautiful, soaring bird.
There's nothing like watching condors soar. People kind of say, oh, it's just a bird, or it's a bird that should have been extinct a long time ago, or it's a dinosaur. And I guess condors are just a bird in the same way that the Grand Canyon is just a canyon. Condors are a symbol of American conservation in a lot of respects, and I think when you see an animal that has that sort of presence, you can't help but just kind of sit back and be in awe. It just carries with it, this legacy of wild places, and it serves us all to protect that resource.
At the tail end of a mild California winter, nesting season has begun on the Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge. A small remnant of the condor's historic range, the refuge is barely 60 miles from metropolitan Los Angeles. Roosting outside their nest cavity, these two condors are one of 7 mated pairs that will incubate an egg on the refuge this year. Given the Chumash Indian name Pitahsi when hatched at the Los Angeles Zoo in 1992, Condor 79 spent over 14 years successfully breeding there. Because condors may lay just one egg every other year, there is a great deal of hope riding on each nesting pair. Both parents were originally hatched in zoos, but have matured to exhibit all the natural behaviors of wild condors. Soaring on a wingspan of 9.5 feet and commonly weighing 20 pounds, the California condor is the largest land bird in North America. With a lifespan that can exceed 50 years, they are exceptionally long-lived, hardy birds. Far from the nearest road, Joseph Brandt scouts for the nest location on the refuge. He manages the Southern California Field Program. The field team keeps track of all the condors in the wild.
So this is the signal for Condor 247, who's the male. The female Condor 79's signal is strongest down canyon. So it looks like her mate, Condor 247, is the one that's on the nest, and this is his signal now. Condors are a really incredible species, biologically speaking, or as a species to manage. You're never without a a challenge to try to overcome. They are extremely behaviorally flexible. They're very intelligent and inquisitive animals. So you're really constantly presented with different puzzles on how to get them to where you want them to be. On both sides, the magnificence and just the kind of the intellectual level, it's really been a rewarding experience for me. I went to school in Oregon at the University of Oregon, majored in biology and environmental science. And then after school, as many aspiring wildlife biologists do, I was looking for some seasonal work in what is normally the off-season in the wintertime. The Ventana Wildlife Society was looking for a seasonal biologist to try to track down condor nesting activity in Big Sur. I was fortunate enough to find the first nest in Monterey County in over 100 years. So that was pretty exciting. And by that time, I was pretty much sold and knew that I was going to be invested into the Condor program. That was in 2006. In 2007, I came back to the service. I really feel like I'm there. I love what I do.
Joseph, Mike Clark, and biologist Jeff Grisdale hike out to enter the nest of the mated pair. Biologists will enter each of the 7 nests on the refuge 5 times over the 6-month nesting season. This initial entry is to check the fertility of the pair's egg. On an adjacent ridge, an observation team is already in place.
Bill, this is Joseph again.
Joseph, this is Bill. I copy.
You guys can see me, right?
Yeah, we have a good view of you.
If I went straight down from the tree, I would be on your right side of the nest.
It would be more straight down and to the right.
Okay, all right. Okay, let us screw around here with the anchors, and then we'll start lowering a rope and trying to get a better idea of where we want to be. We'll be in touch. Thanks, Joseph Clear. Early on, the birds started nesting in 2001, and from 2001 till about 2005, we took a pretty hands-off approach, and what was found then was that there was a lot of issues with the nesting process that related to this microtrash, these small bits and pieces essentially being collected by the parents and being brought to the nest, fed to the chicks. The chicks would have an impaction form in their gut, and they would slowly starve to death because they weren't able to digest any food. So in response to that, we started to become more hands-on with the way that we'd manage nests. We'll actually climb into these nests and pull the eggs to check them for fertility or examine the chicks to get an overall health assessment, and then also clean the nests of any trash items that had been brought to the nest by the parents. So that's been pretty effective. It's not a long-term solution, but in the meantime, we've actually been able to fledge many, many more chicks. So there was about a 10-fold increase in the number of chicks that we were successfully fledging. It's just a way that we can augment the population with this naturally fledged bird. Got my ascenders and atria. We're good to go.
Am I looking, Bill?
You need to go more left.
15, 20 feet forward. Mike's on rope.
You can tell Mike, Jeff, that I'm clear of any rock fall, so don't worry if he's knocking things loose.
Okay.
drive to return to incubation brings Pitahsi back to the nest. 20 years old and fearless, she has a lot of experience with human interaction. The oldest female condor in the wild, her bold personality makes her a force for the biologists to contend with.
I think if you just goose her, she'll bust.
As Joseph distracts Potashi, Mike reaches beneath her and swaps her real egg for a plastic model egg. Because the reproductive rate for condors is naturally low, the stress on the pairs created by entering the nest is balanced against the higher nesting success rate that results from this intervention. Joseph uses a plastic bag to create darkness and a flashlight to shine through the eggshell.
It's got a bubble in it.
Ah, crap.
27 days after Potashi laid the egg, Joseph finds it to be infertile.
All right. Well, there's one more egg we need.
Mike has placed a model egg with Potashi, so the birds will continue incubating. 30 days from now, Joseph will return with a fertile egg from the captive population. That way, even though their own egg was unsuccessful, Potashi and her mate will still have a good chance of rearing a chick in the wild.
We're going to do all the measurements and wait when we get back to the car. There's no need to do it here. So we're going to pack up and be leaving the nest.
Copy that.
All right, Joseph clear. And we'll be leaving here soon.
Bill clear.
About 80% of all eggs go on to hatch, and that's across species. There's going to be a number of eggs that just don't end up hatching because they're not fertile, or they're malpositioned, or something just went wrong in the incubation process. And we can thwart that failure by going in and swapping out those eggs. So we can take an egg that's not doing well in the wild nest, say because it's infertile, replace it with a model egg, and then wait until we have an egg that's about to hatch in captivity. And so then we can take that egg that's about to hatch, replace a dummy egg, and the condor pairs, they're really tolerant of that disturbance. And they'll go on to raise that chick like it was their own.
As wide-ranging scavengers, condors soar over expansive areas well beyond the refuges.
One of the unique things about condors is they're scavengers, and they commonly feed on cattle, deer, pigs, large ungulate species. To maintain a healthy body weight, they need to eat every 2 to 3 days. Their food supply is pretty well dispersed over their range. Because of their great size, they're able to cover really great distances without expending a lot of energy. They're really energy efficient and have low metabolic rates. They need habitat with reliable winds and uplift from thermal activity. Typically, the wind currents are best during midday, and condors are really able to take off and travel great distances between nesting territories and foraging grounds or common roost sites.
"20 years of field experience and exhaustive scientific research reveal the shadow over the condor to be lead ammunition. Used in hunting and for managing nuisance animals on ranch lands, lead bullets fragment into hundreds of small pieces on impact. Condors ingest these toxic fragments as they scavenge on animal remains.
Lead is a game changer for sure. If lead weren't in the environment, there's many things that we could do differently as far as how we could encourage the birds to inhabit more of their range. Now we kind of proceed really slowly in terms of those aspects of the program, because we're always very cautious about birds moving into new areas because we don't know what the lead load of those areas is going to be. But we also have the technology and tools today that give us such a more detailed look into what condors do on a day-to-day basis, such that we can really paint a picture of what they're doing on a landscape level, because it is such a landscape level species. It inhabits so much area. In order to cover that wide area, we've put transmitters on the birds. They give us GPS locations on an hourly basis each day. We can use those locations to determine where there are birds congregating, and then we can go out and investigate those congregations. And as you'd imagine, that's a pretty important aspect of our program in order to determine the possibility of lead contamination, and then just to know that there's enough food out there for the birds to feed on.
On the Hopper Mountain Refuge, just a few short miles from her nest, Potashi has been baited into a trap by biologists. Despite being stressful for the birds, the potential for lead poisoning makes routine health evaluations necessary. The field team balances the goal of creating a self-sustaining wild population against the health threats the birds may encounter while foraging in the wild. A test commonly used for children exposed to lead paint is used in the field to test condors. Pitashi's test reveals the quantity of lead in her system at just under half of the level requiring treatment. This intensive management of the wild condor population defines the species' recovery status today. Wild in behavior, but not entirely free. Condor 247 watches with interest and awaits Pitashi's release. With a new wing tag and an updated radio transceiver in place, Pitashi is free to join her mate.
We like to look at the program as 4 stages that we went through, and the first one was the rescue effort. The second was the captive breeding effort. The third is the reintroduction. And now where we are today is really creating a self-sustaining population of condors back within their historic range. And see, that probably is now the biggest challenge. Maybe that's the most difficult challenge that we will have had in, say, the 30 years of this program.
So try to keep them as warm as you can until you're good to go.
On the day planned to re-enter Pitashi's nest, Joseph travels to the LA Zoo to retrieve a captive-bred egg for the wild condors to foster. But as with all things in nature, natural events unfold on their own schedule. The only available egg has hatched the day prior.
He's still the same size, if not smaller, than he was. The egg's way bigger than the egg that he came out of, so he should fit in it just fine. What you're going to do is you're going to put him back in the hatching position. That's the only way he's going to fit in there, which he's not going to like at first. So he's already complaining that he's cold. That's what that position is. Slide, never down he goes.
Mike Clark coaches Joseph on something never before attempted outside of a zoo: placing the newly hatched chick back into an egg for adoption by a wild condor pair. Although not without risk, it's a calculated option that will allow them to take advantage of the experienced nesting pair. Mike's 2 decades of experience with condor breeding and behavior comes into play as he lays out what to expect.
And then just do the same on the other side. And then you could leave that tape in there if you want to. If you put them like something like this, up against something, like that, and they see it, they'll come over, they'll do one of these. Do that a couple times. He pushes out, and out he comes. Okay. What a big ride. Good.
It has been 30 days since the last nest entry, when the infertile egg was replaced with a model egg. As Joseph approaches, Potashi spreads her wings to appear larger and stands her ground. With a gloved hand, he attempts to diffuse her aggression. After leaving Joseph alone for a few moments, Pitashi's protective instincts bring her back to her nest. Knowing that her discontent over his presence could lead Pitashi to harm the hatchling, Joseph again tries to diffuse the bird's aggression. As was hoped, Pitashi takes the newly hatched chick as her own. She and her mate will brood the chick for 30 days, keeping it warm and protected with close contact. The pair will then continue feeding the young bird for as long as a year and a half. That lengthy parenting process is a part of why the reproductive rate of condors is so low. And yet another reason why biologists work so diligently to make the most of each and every nest.
Estelle, this is Joseph. Do you copy? She might have turned her radio off. Sweet. Hey, we're just touching base with Jan and...
Janet Hamber has been part of the California Condor's recovery since day one more than 40 years ago, making her the most veteran condor conservationist on the planet. Jan still volunteers in the field by helping to track the location of the birds. She enjoys the respect of the younger generation of biologists, many of whom were not yet born when she began her work with condors in the 1970s.
Well, it sounded like it went pretty well.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting, you know.
Yeah.
So we had a chick,
Right.
and we put it
And you stuck it back in?
into not its eggshell, but another eggshell. You know, taped a little bit in there, and then brought it down and had it, you know, gave it to 79. The egg didn't fool her all that much. She just kind of walked up. The chick squeaked. She like pushed the top, you know, the cap. She just threw, like, pushed that off to the side, and then just, you know, started nuzzling the chick a little bit, and then kind of got it out of the shell, and then pulled it underneath her and sat and brooded. So and it was pretty high stress. You're just like, oh, you know, is everything gonna work out? So we've got our first chick.
I love the innovations that you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, without they'd done it in captivity a couple of times.
They have?
And, yeah, so it's a pretty, you know, well-tested method.
But anyhow.
So anyways, I'll let you.
Yeah, go.
I'll let you go.
Go.
At the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, Jan manages an archive of field observations and research on the condor that dates back over 100 years. During the 1980s, when there was much controversy in the environmental community on the removal of the last remaining condors from the wild, Jan was an active contributor to the field program.
This is 1987, and by then there was only one wild California condor in the entire world. So I wrote. I've had it on my mind to write up the last days of wild condors for months, but somehow I couldn't do it. It is still painful for me to think about those huge wings held captive in a cage in LA and know that never again will I thrill to the sight of that majestic bird soaring for miles so effortlessly on the wind currents. On the morning of April 18th, 1987, I sat on my OP and followed AC-9 by telemetry signal as he left the roost on Brush Mountain and headed straight for Hudson Ranch. He went in, and as I was violently screaming at him to get out of the way, I saw a puff of smoke, and the net went over him just a foot or so away from freedom. For all the effort that had been expended, for all the plans that had been laid, for all the hopes that had been imagined, I just knew that I had been part of a historic moment, the purposeful removing of an endangered species from the wild to save it. And I put down my head on the steering wheel and cried.
But by the time we got the 9 birds in the wild, we knew that we weren't going to be able to save the species in the wild, and that eventually all the birds would have to come into captivity. And the understanding when those last birds came in was that they were essentially being put in protective custody, and there was always a possibility that at some point in the future that those birds could be released back into the wild. We haven't released all of those birds back into the wild, but we've released 3 of them so far. 2 of them have died and 1 is still alive. 1 was shot and 1 died of lead poisoning.
Back at the zoo, Mike Clark has in hand the last wild condor, AC-9. Re-released to the wild in 2002 as Condor 21, he is the only original wild condor flying free.
Right side?
Yep.
He was the very last wild condor captured of the original wild flock. Once he was captured, there were no more wild condors in the wild. There were none in the wild.
The lead chelation treatment he will undergo today is his 5th round for the week. 6 weeks of treatment will be required to purge the lead from his system.
Nowhere would we have imagined that we would be taking care of 15 birds at a time that are wild, that are just coming in because of lead toxicity. Our job mainly is to maintain a captive flock and breed them and reproduce birds in captivity to support the release efforts. I mean, we're doing that and we're doing all of this. So this is his 5th treatment in 5 days. There is a number that we look for on the field test kit that will say whether or not he will be treated or not, and it's anything above 25 micrograms per deciliter. The only thing that's acceptable in humans is 0. But we're letting them go at 25 because it's just, we'd have every one of them in here all the time if we were trying to get them 0.
When we first started identifying lead toxicosis as a problem in the wild population, obviously one of the first questions we needed to address is where's the lead coming from? So this is a post-mortem radiograph or X-ray image taken of an adult condor. And if you look carefully, you can see 2 small white spots. Those are metallic densities. You can see the outline of the gizzard right here, and there's at least 3, possibly 4 pieces of lead shot in the upper gastrointestinal tract where we know the lead is absorbed, and when it gets into their system, that's when they suffer lead toxicosis. The way they're probably picking it up from the carcasses is either a hunter shot carcass that's not recovered, so it's still out there, or what are called gut piles, where a hunter recovers the carcass, they collect what they want, and they leave the remains behind, and those remains that have been left behind might still contain lead fragments.
All of these are lead.
So all those little white dots?
All of this right here is lead, yeah.
The condors or other birds come along to feed on those remains, and they can pick up lead from that. It's important to consider all possible sources of lead, because if we want to mitigate those causes of lead, we need to identify all the possible causes of lead toxicosis. So we've been looking hard. At this point, the only sources of lead we've been able to implicate are lead ammunition.
Two months after the chick was placed in the nest, Joseph and biologist Blake Massey once again descend into the canyon. The hope is that today's health check will be brief and problem-free.
When we climb into a condor nest, our intent is to examine the chick, determine whether or not it's healthy. If it's healthy, we do very little. We'll go in at 30 days of age, at 60 days of age, at 90 days of age, and at 120 days of age. The 30 and 60 days of age, we give West Nile vaccination and a booster. We'll take a weight, take a blood sample, and that's pretty much it for the chick. And then we'll clean any trash items that we find in the nest. The 90 days of age is really when we saw the most of the problems with microtrash arise. That's when the impaction is most likely to occur. And then the 120 days of age is when we put a transmitter on the chick so that we can monitor it, as soon as it starts flying around. And we don't go in after 120 because at that point the chick is maybe more likely to fly away than it is to go cower in the corner. And we don't go any further beyond that age.
Each spring and fall, all of the free-flying condors in California are trapped for health evaluations.
So when I wake up in the morning and we've got a handful of birds to handle, what I'd like to have happen, maybe first and foremost, is to have everything go smoothly. No people bitten, no birds hurt. But then after that, it's to to be able to release every single bird that we handle and not to have to treat any. That's the best indication that we have that birds are doing all right out in the environment. Last spring, when we did our last round of trap up, we had 13 birds out of the 45 that we tested. So that's about 30% of the population had exposures that we treated, which is a greater than 30 micrograms per deciliter.
This year, yes, is definitely higher than last year. We had far more birds that we needed to send down to the LA Zoo to get chelation therapy this year than we did last year. I think Central California has also had a very high year, so we're definitely dealing with a persistent problem.
All right, there's one to mark. 1, 2, 10. All right, you want to sample this one, Blake?
The trapping events are also an opportunity to acquire samples from the birds that inform scientific research.
That's a good eye.
To get a better understanding of the sort of long-term or chronic lead exposure that these condors face, we started to evaluate their feathers and basically looking at the lead concentration and the isotopic signature of the lead in the feather as it's growing. Every day, the feather will grow about 0.2 inches. And so we can basically track and look at a couple inches of feather and say within those 4 days, the condor had high lead exposure or low lead exposure. And if we put all those pieces together, we can reconstruct the exposure history for the condor over the whole time frame of feather growth. And for condors, that could be about 4 months. So it's giving us a much greater understanding for how often are these condors lead poisoned, how acute is the lead poisoning event, how long does the lead poisoning last. And from this, we're getting a much better understanding of really how substantial and significant the lead poisoning problem is for the recovery of the California condor.
In the spring of 2012, Finkelstein's work made international headlines when published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. Her 5-year study found that lead from ammunition was very near entirely to blame for the condor's frequent health problems. The study concluded that the species could never be conservation program independent as long as spent lead ammunition was found in their habitat. Many in the gun industry and some hunters see the scientific studies as just another anti-hunting agenda. Other hunters see their place in the conservation landscape in a more balanced way.
Hunting is really an important component when we talk about wildlife management. I think a lot of times hunters only think about the species that they're hunting, and not the ones that interact or actually become part of the whole ecosystem out there.
These are 2 bullets of the same caliber, .243. And you can see the bullet to the right here has a lead tip, and the bullet to the left has a fully jacketed copper round.
These 2 bullets will take and do exactly the same thing. One of them is just not friendly to wildlife, friendly to human consumption, and again friendly to the resources. So we have to make that change out there. We have a national symbol, the bald eagle. Bald eagles take and die all the time from lead poisoning. Golden eagles do, and any other wildlife are affected by these lead fragments that are left in gut piles and in carcasses that are wounded animals that are out there, or animals that are just shot as varmints, like ground squirrels. Condor is kind of like the canary in the mine. It's giving us, some indication that lead isn't a good product to be putting out on the environment.
In 2007, California legislators passed the Ridley Tree Condor Preservation Act, which made it illegal to hunt with lead ammunition in the species range. Because the condor flies free over thousands of square miles of California countryside, the state ban has not proven to be as effective as hoped. The birds continue to suffer from potentially lethal lead exposure on a regular basis.
This bird is a high level on our field test kit, and our field test kit only measures up to 65 micrograms per deciliter. So it's greater than 65 micrograms per deciliter. We treat birds greater than 30 micrograms per deciliter. Because this bird has an elevated level, we'll kennel it up and transport it to the Los Angeles Zoo either this evening or early tomorrow morning for a treatment, which is chelation therapy. And he'll be in captivity for probably at least 2 weeks for the treatment, but depending on how elevated his level is and whether or not he shows any clinical sign, he could stay for longer.
Well, the arrhythmias are better than yesterday. She had a bunch of arrhythmias. She had double beats, she had gallops. I actually wondered if she was in atrial fibrillation. I don't hear that now, so that's good. I'm thrilled to hear a normal heart, so that to me is a good step. She sure didn't look like she minded you picking her up, though.
Which, yeah, I would like a little more fight.
Yeah, yeah.
Really sick, just lay that.
Yeah, so I'd hope that would be a little bit, she'd be a little more feisty.
We don't have a lab level yet back, but on the field test kit, that evening she came in, it was over 65, right?
That's right. Let me go check again. It may be back now. I'll follow up from there. And then I'll come see her tomorrow. You want to give me a ring?
Okay.
Okay.
For me, she's definitely special because she was the first bird when I started working in this program that I got to help take out to the wild. So she was...
How long ago was that?
That was... Well, she's been out there 16 years. So the first month I started here, we took about 12 birds out to the field, and this bird was in my car that I was responsible for her well-being on the way out to the field. So she's definitely special to me because it was just an incredible experience to help release birds to the wild. Yeah, we have 5 birds in the wild, and then we brought a large group out right after that, and she's part of that group. So she's been out a long time.
Ready?
Yep. She's a little wobbly, but yeah, she's definitely... more wobbly than I've seen her. You like a little more fight for them, not us, but she's definitely very tired. This is exhausting for her to be this sick. Definitely makes our job easy, but we'd rather have it be difficult.
This fall in particular, you know, that was a stressful time, and it's not easy. It's really a hard thing to have to deal with, especially, you know, given that, you know, I've been with the program for 5 years, and, you know, some of these birds I've seen as chicks. I released some of these birds, and then you bring them into the zoo and they're sick and they die. You know, you've invested all that you can into their life up to that point, especially when, you know, it's a bird that fledged from a wild nest. It's trying, it really is, because you can't help but have some sort of attachment to the animal that you've worked with for 5 years. I try to keep focused on the big picture, and are we moving the population in the right direction? What's happening at the population level when I'm considering things as a biologist? But, you know, I'm not just a biologist. You know, I'm a father and a human. You know, it's not hard to build an attachment with any individual bird within the population, just because of how often you're interacting with them and observing them or caring for them. You still get that, and it's never easy. You know, there's not a bird in the population that's not going to be treated given the current environment. That's discouraging, and it's disheartening, because it just means that we have a lot more work to do and a lot more to overcome.
And I think that's probably a pretty simple thing to do, if we could just get individuals to maybe take a little extra effort and try to work on mitigating or eliminating those human-caused mortality factors. I think the condors would recover.
For Potashi and Condor 247, their nest has been a success. After a false start with an infertile egg, their adoption of a zoo-bred chick as their own has resulted in a healthy bird with all the promise of a native wild condor. With the last health check at 120 days, Condor 599 has dodged the hazards of microtrash and lead. Scrambling hops around the canyon develop her confidence in her wings and show all signs of wanting to join her parents in flight. In the 8 months since Joseph introduced the bird to the nest, the chick has grown from a quarter pound to nearly 20. The fledgling process is a gradual one, with the soaring flight of the condor coming after much hopping and flapping of wings, which now approach 9 feet in length. Pitahsi and 247 will continue to feed and protect the fledgling for many months to come. Remarkable parents, the condor pair will model the behavior the young bird will need to survive and integrate into the flock. By Thanksgiving, in an amazing display of avian beauty, the fledgling condor soars above Hopper Canyon.
There's nothing like watching condors soar. To me, that's what it's all about. That's what all of this work is for. It's just to get them out there doing their thing. So any opportunity that I can get out and show my son who's 5. Stretch! Like a big condor. I have a newborn, so I hope to show him as well when he's of age, but to show them, you know, the birds. And you know, they will, you know, see me handle them, and, you know, they're gonna have that up close look, but it's really when we're watching them, you know, soaring over some canyon somewhere, is where I find it most rewarding. Is because, you know, for all as fun the hands-on stuff is, the reward is the hands-off. It's just being able to step back and just kind of see, you know, see the fruits of your labor, I guess. Yeah, so that's what it is for me.